Hello and welcome back to Garden and Allotment Tips podcast, hosted by Gardening with Ben. If you've not checked out my other main podcast channel, go and check out my podcast channel called Gardening with Ben, available on any podcast platform, or you can click the link in the description. And in them episodes we've been talking about all the things that you can plant in June, and also what jobs need doing in the garden and allotment for the month. So make sure you go and check out them podcasts and give that channel a subscribe too. So what are we going to be talking about today? Yesterday we talked about how to grow sweet corn successfully and how to get that growing. Now today we're going to talk about growing in a polytunnel, as I'm learning all the time. Being a gardener for 16 years, you're learning every single day, and all the time new things are popping up and learning lots of new stuff and trying different things and seeing how we get on with it all. Now, having a polytunnel in your garden or in your allotment is an expensive investment. There is some polytunnels out there what probably cost around £100, which I do not recommend. Obviously there's brands out there what try and sell them, but I wouldn't recommend them ones whatsoever. They're just like plastic, they're like squares and stuff like that. They're sometimes green or sometimes white, but they're not professional proper polytunnels. And give them a couple of years and they'll be ripped from the wind, or they'll be blown away, or they'll be ruined, or they even disintegrate as well. I've seen some polytunnels and the squares just fray up into loads of different squares. So if you're going to be buying a polytunnel for an allotment or a garden, the ones that I would suggest looking at would be your bigger brand ones, what you'll see, and they're often called like Northern Polytunnels, First Polytunnels, Premier Polytunnels. There's plenty of big brands out there, and these are the professional polytunnels what are made of steel hoops, which are actually dug into the ground and secured in, and then you have a plastic covering what goes over the top of the polytunnel, and it's usually a special type of plastic. On these ones that cost around £100, they're not proper plastic, which are not sufficient for the sun. Now the ones on a professional polytunnel, they let the UV through, and it traps the sunlight in, which helps with ripening, which helps with heating it up, and which helps with all the growing of the polytunnel completely. And that is what's needed, to be honest. It's, yes, you're looking at a few £100, but it's better to save up and get a proper one than get a cheap one and it ends up snapping, it ends up blowing away and stuff like that. Because I've seen it on loads of Facebook posts where people have shared pictures of these £100 polytunnels, and the wind's just battered them and snapped them and broke them and twisted them. So go for the proper professional polytunnels if you are thinking about getting a polytunnel. Now, usually in my polytunnel I just stick to growing tomatoes and cucumbers, but this year I am experimenting. I'm trying some things differently this year. I am trying melons. I've scrapped the tomatoes. I'm going to be growing the tomatoes in my shed or outside because it's plenty of warm enough for them to grow. But the watermelons obviously need heat and a lot of humidity. So we're going to be trying melons in there. I've grown cantaloupes in there before, cantaloupe melons, which grew fantastic and delicious. But this year I'm going out and trying watermelons in there. I tried them in my shed, but it weren't hot enough, it weren't sufficient enough for them. But we're growing them in the polytunnel this year, and so far they're growing pretty well. They've probably been in their buckets for about 2 weeks now, and they're getting bigger by the day, definitely. And I'm keeping them watered on a regular basis, and they're doing really, really well. So we've got the melons growing, and also for the first time, which I don't know why I've never tried it, I've had the polytunnel for like 10 years now, but I'm trying lettuce in there. Now I've got some lettuce growing outside and I've got some plants left over, and I thought, why not try and grow some inside the polytunnel and see how they get on in there. So that's what I've done. I've potted them up. I've not planted them in any special compost or anything like that. I've just stuck to normal soil, general soil. I've dug it up from the garden, put it in plant pots, and planted a lettuce in each plant pot. Now they're quite biggish plant pots, not huge but biggish ones, and I planted these about a week after the ones that I planted outside, and so far the ones in the polytunnel are double the size of the ones outside, obviously from the heat, but they're not getting as much water because obviously they're not getting the rain, and I'm not down there all the time to water them, so I'm quite surprised with how well they're actually doing. So overall they're working pretty well, and there's many things that you can grow in the polytunnel. I've not really tried growing other stuff yet, but like you can grow your courgettes in there in pots, you can grow pumpkins in there. Now they do fantastic in a polytunnel, growing a pumpkin in a polytunnel, so I might actually try and get a pumpkin plant and seeing if we can get it growing in the polytunnel to see how we can get on and see if we can get some good pumpkins. So you can grow all your squashes in there because they can grow in pots, but obviously one plant per pot, but you can get some great success. And obviously you can grow your peppers in there, you can grow aubergines in there, you can grow carrots in there. If you've got a bucket, fill it up with compost, make sure there's some holes drilled in the bottom, sprinkle some carrot seeds in and keep them watered, and you'll get some fantastic carrots growing in there. Spring onions, they'll grow brilliantly in there. There's plenty of stuff in there what will grow well. The stuff that you don't want to grow in there would be like your beetroot. That would take up one pot on its own, just one beetroot. It's not sufficient enough to grow in a tub. Now obviously you can grow them in the ground, but I've got black membrane on the ground in my polytunnel because I don't want the weeds growing through. I want to keep it weed free, and the black membrane keeps it weed free. And obviously if you had no black membrane on it and you were watering all the time, the weeds would grow fast. So I'm wanting to keep mine weed free, to be honest. But there's so much out there, and I need to investigate more things that you can actually grow in the polytunnel. And obviously you can grow a grapevine in there. Now I've got a grapevine growing, and I'm going to start mine growing into my shed, and hopefully we'll get some fantastic grapes over the years to come. But there's all these small little things that you can grow. You can grow in the polytunnel, and obviously having a polytunnel you can grow later on into the season as well, because it'll still be warm in there come end of October. Yeah, it'll be getting some cold nights, but it won't get to freezing, and stuff will still grow in there. So if you're looking at getting a polytunnel, make sure you save up for a few years rather than looking at the cheaper varieties. Splash out on a good one, it will last you years. Mine has been in place for 10 years and the skin is still on it. Yes, there's a few rips on it, but you can get some polytunnel tape and it seals it really well and holds it together. So if you need any advice on getting a polytunnel, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. I've helped quite a few people out with polytunnels on what's the best ones to order, so feel free to drop me a message on Instagram if you are looking at getting a polytunnel, and I will give you all the tips and advice that I can give on you. And I'll do another podcast on how to put up a polytunnel and stuff like that in the future. So if you're new to this podcast, make sure you do click that follow, make sure you click that subscribe, and then you get notified when new podcasts come up. And also you can, if you follow me on Facebook, you can send me Facebook stars now, and that all goes towards my plants on my allotment. Everything goes back into my allotment, getting new plants and stuff like that to keep giving you all content. So thanks for those that have given me stars so far. I think I'm up to 500 so far, so thanks for that. Until next time, remember, keep smiling, keep gardening, and keep listening to Gardening with Ben's podcasts.